Good morning and welcome to Solidarity Live. I don't really have words to open this week. Yesterday was one of the more manic political days I think I've ever experienced in my entire life, and we are excited to be here with you guys to talk about it. Hi, Alex. How are you this morning?
Oh, that was a great introduction, Jocelyn. I think I will say we had like one good morning in 2021, but we're still grading on that curve. This show was going to be on multiple things. There's just been so much news over the past couple days, but I am extremely happy to be discussing it with our guest, David Sirota, journalist and founder of the Daily Poster. Maybe David, you can help us make a little bit of sense of what's going on because I'm not filled with despair. I'm not. There's a lot of hope in what has happened and what we're seeing, but at the same time, we just saw armed insurrectionists storm the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, get onto the floors of the Senate and the House, which I will say cannot be accomplished without some amount of complicity of the Capitol Police. So that's worrying. But at the end, it actually might have sped up the certification of Joe Biden's electoral college victory because a bunch of senators stopped protesting. So, David, what's your take just on where we are right now and what it means for progressives right now who are looking to build a better future for us all?
Well, I think a good way to think about this, it's both metaphorically and I think in reality, is the 24-hour period that we saw, which was the 24-hour period that we saw in American politics was Georgia elected the Black Reverend of Martin Luther King's church as a senator and a Jewish guy as a senator as they were campaigning for direct $2,000 checks, direct aid to millions of people in their state. So they defeated two right-wing authoritarians. That was one thing that happened in that 24-hour period. And then we saw right-wing authoritarians storm the Capitol, egged on by right-wing Republican authoritarians in Congress. So these are two things at the opposite ends of politics, right? They're almost mirror opposites. Arguably, you could say that there's a connection. One was a reaction to the other. I mean, I don't think it was a direct reaction, right? I think these protests were being planned for a long time. They weren't about Georgia in specific, but clearly these are two things that are very different. They are opposite, and I think, but I think the link between them, if I'm being hopeful about it, is it tells us what a politics looks like that tries to prevent the spread of the authoritarian ideology to the general population. And I think that's one side note I want to be clear about. There is a concern with the insurrectionists themselves, the specific people, the specific mob that stormed the Capitol. And then there's I would argue, the equally big, if not bigger, concern about their ideology becoming popularized in the general public. That's arguably an even bigger problem. There's always going to be a right-wing authoritarian movement, unfortunately, in this country. It has been relatively small for much of our history. There's been upsurges and whatnot, but it hasn't been something that has gained a lot of popular agency in the general public, but it has been rising. And we see polls now that show, a third of Americans have, they're not authoritarians, but are authoritarian adjacent. They don't necessarily mind an authoritarian ideology. So the point in bringing up Georgia is to think about it, I think, in juxtaposition to the insurrection that we saw, and ask ourselves, does it answer a question about what the proper way to move forward is? And I would argue that it does in this way, that the insurrection and the ideology that it purports to represent, I think, has a chance to become more popularized in the general public at a time of an economic crisis, at a time when people feel like the government doesn't listen to them, at a time when people feel like the government is basically owned and operated by big money interests. That we've seen that through. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say, or sort of. I don't think that's rocket science, right? I mean, we've seen that in history. Like, you deny the peasants basic subsistence, and guess what? You've created the environment for right-wing authoritarians to opportunistically take advantage of the situation. And I think Georgia tells us what kind of politics we need to have to try to prevent that from happening. That in Georgia, two candidates in a deep South state, one a black man, another a Jewish man. So running in states that haven't necessarily been so open to those kinds of candidates in the past, were able to win against right-wing authoritarians by campaigning for direct and immediate help for millions of people in their state. Not means-tested programs, not, this complicated Rube Goldberg machine program, not, empty platitudes about the soul of the nation, right? They campaigned specifically for, like, if you vote for me, you're getting $2,000, right? It doesn't get more simple than that. And I think that the polls suggest that helped them win. That helped. That was a decisive factor. And so the point in bringing that up is to say that if we look at how to actually try to prevent the spread of an authoritarian ideology, how to prevent right-wing authoritarian politicians from continuing to gain power, then I would argue one of the lessons from Georgia is you have to be serious about campaigning on and then delivering real material gains for working people. That doesn't mean you're not going to have a right-wing authoritarian movement in America, right? That's going to exist. But the focus has to be, how do you prevent that from spreading to being popularized, to having millions and millions of people be sympathetic to that movement? And that's to me, that's the long-term thing that I, think about a lot and worry about a lot.
So something that, I think Jocelyn and I had this discussion with Paul Farmer. I think it was our last show, actually.
Oh,
Before
yeah.
the
How
break.
it feels like a million years ago now.
It basically was in 2020 and 2021 timing. But a root of his worldview and philosophy that both Jocelyn and I take a lot from is the idea of pragmatic solidarity. That solidarity is super powerful. It can basically accomplish anything, but to be in solidarity with people from afar and not to materially improve their situation is not going to lead to change. You actually have to make people's lives better. That's what you do to make the solidarity real. To people will join together and fight to make a better world. But you actually have to ensure that people's lives are getting better, that it's not just a utopian vision that's always just beyond the next rise. And that is, I believe as well, the key to fighting what I call fascism, authoritarianism. I think that the lexicon has multiple words for it. I have a few rules, which one is, and they're historical, austerity leads to fascism, right? The austerity economics of the Obama era, Tea Party, yes, but also elite democratic thought that led, that 6 years was more in an austerity frame. You had 2 years outside of it. Austerity leads to fascism. You see that all around Europe as well after the collapse. And then the only bulwark you have, the only way to walk it back once it's sort of, Donald Trump is the genie and he's out of the bottle. And the only way to walk it back is, as you say, to make it really clear, elect us and we're going to materially improve your life. We're going to get you healthcare. We're going to get $2,000 checks in your pocket on day one. We're going to ensure that your Social Security benefits are expanded and never cut, and you don't have to spend your time worrying. And by the way, we're not in the pocket of these Wall Street plutocrats. Like that's what pragmatic solidarity really shows people through deeds, that who's on whose side. So I'm also very hopeful, but hope as a strategy, never amounts to anything. So I also feel like we have a lot more resources on the progressive side, on the popular movement side, to ensure that we didn't win everything, but we actually have a people-powered movement to demand day one $2,000 checks, and all the other things that I've listed. And I agree that the way we fight the insurrectionists, the coup attempt, is by pragmatic solidarity. But I'd add also accountability, that the people involved, we cannot just turn the page on this. When you turn the page on this, you end up with a torturer in charge of the CIA, right? That's what happened when we turned the page on George W. Bush's, illegal wars and torturing all over the world. Is the woman who was torturing now runs the CIA. And I believe that is at least nearly as important as the pragmatic solidarity, is that we make sure that we have accountability for everyone involved in the insurrection that we saw, and also for the crimes that took place during the Trump administration. Children were put in cages, right? Illegal actions were taken by agents of our government, and they need to be held accountable.
I mean, I totally agree. I think that, but we have to appreciate that we live in what I've called a culture of impunity. I mean, for all the talk of law and order in our country, and we have created, especially in the last 30, 40 years, we have created a culture of, and it's not just in our criminal justice system, it's social, political, legal, a culture of impunity that says people with power, people with fame, people with platforms, people with obviously money do not face accountability. And I think, obviously the most obvious examples of that are, we were lied into a war and nobody was held accountable. In fact, not only was nobody prosecuted, nobody was investigated. People were given media platforms, people were given riches, people remain, they remain in good standing in elite society, the people who literally lied us into a war. The Wall Street financial crisis, nobody was prosecuted. The people who created the deregulatory policies that led to that, and who were told it was going to lead to that, they remain, again, they weren't prosecuted. The bankers weren't prosecuted, and the people who created the policies were reelected. They were given, again, media platforms. I mean, Larry Summers, good example from recent news. Larry Summers, the guy who quite literally complicated the effort to get $2,000 checks out to people, railing on them, and then Mitch McConnell weaponized what Larry Summers had put out there. Larry Summers is the guy who, as Treasury Secretary, helped deregulate the economy that created the Wall Street, the financial crisis. And of course, he was also one of the people who prevented us from getting a bigger stimulus after the financial crisis, remains in good standing to then screw up and complicate and help the Republicans block the $2,000 checks. And the point is, about accountability, is that there's no social, political, or legal accountability for people like that. Again, beyond just prosecute. Like, I'm not saying get prosecuted, but like, you shouldn't be held up as an expert or a credible, kind of credible person. But and we go through all sorts of examples like that. But the question now is like, can you? So you can lie the country into a war and face no consequences. You can help crater the entire global economy and ruin millions of lives and face no consequences and be rewarded with riches. Can you literally run or egg on an insurrection against the United States government and face no consequences. To me, that's the big question right now. And I would argue that the Republicans who have egged it on are banking on that culture of impunity. They are assuming that not only will they not face any consequences for trying to overturn the national election, but that in fact they will be rewarded in their next elections or in fundraising. And the question is, can that culture of impunity be broken? Are we going to break from that, or are we just going to allow that to continue? Because I agree with you. If you allow people to just say, "Hey, that was one day, no big deal," let's just carry on. What comes next? What kind of deterrent happens?
Well, I mean, it happens again. And this is the reality that as we're talking, I'm struck by the fact that even people who, working class people, middle class people, who are totally divorced from the intellectual details of the conversation we're having, are still aware of the culture of impunity you're talking about. You feel it when you're doing any kind of field work or any kind of conversations with people who are allegedly, politically not engaged. They are politically engaged enough to know that they are not being listened to. And they are politically engaged enough to know that if you are a member of the political or financial elite, it's like you're saying, David, you're just going to be able to do whatever the hell you want ad nauseum. You can commit war crimes. You can crash the entire economy. You can ransack the entire budget for your friends, and nothing is going to happen to you. And it's so interesting to me because one thing that I have started to take issue with is like even the word stimulus checks. These aren't stimulus checks.
Right.
This
Right.
is our money. This is money that we paid for with our taxes. Meanwhile, a treasonous criminal is in the White House who only paid $750 in taxes and is like single-handedly writing checks for his friends. And this is the problem that we have in this country right now. We have a group of people who, with good reason, don't believe anyone who's even peripherally related to the political system, and that absolutely opens the door for Donald Trump or anyone who looks or smells a little bit different to capture the public imagination. Because again, it's one of those things where if you have a situation where people can't barely provide for their families in the most basic way, they're reactive. They're living in a state of emotional reactivity. And instead of shaming those people, although again, like you're saying, I'm not talking about the far right. I'm not saying we should forgive KKK members and shit. But when we're talking about your average or politically disengaged person, I don't blame these people for being politically disengaged. They're too busy working 3 jobs to provide for their families. It's like, I'm just very unhappy with how things have gone.
I think that's fair, and I think we have to understand that the culture of impunity is something relatively new in America. I mean, it wasn't that long ago in the scope of history that, and I'm not holding him up as some great hero, but the Reagan administration prosecuted people after the Wall Street collapse. Thousands of prosecutions in that situation. I mean, I was saying to a friend recently that the last time I remember somebody, people who were really powerful, a kind of scandal that was systemic, that systematically harmed people, who were then the perpetrators were prosecuted. I may be a little bit wrong here, but the last big one I think was Enron. That you gotta reach all the way back to, like, I'm not talking about there people get prosecuted all the time. I'm talking about like an event that happened that systematically hurt the whole country and the whole economy. Like, you got to look back to basically Enron. I mean, that's a long time. That is a long time where we have, and I would argue that we have created a culture of impunity that is so baked in now that we have now seen impunity. Legislators try to legislate impunity. I mean, the entire debate that dominated Congress and many state legislatures during the pandemic has been about whether to grant corporations immunity from lawsuits if they make business decisions that kill or injure their workers during the pandemic. You can see that as an expression of corporate power and greed, but take it one level further. In a country that doesn't prosecute Wall Street bankers who ruin the global economy, doesn't prosecute people who lie us into a war, and which may not hold accountable people who literally organize an insurrection against the U.S. government. Now you've got lawmakers in the government trying to bake immunity and a lack of accountability into the law itself, saying you cannot hold corporations accountable for killing people. Now, granted, it didn't pass, but the fact that was, I mean, it didn't pass Congress, it passed some legislatures, but the fact that's even in the conversation, like, step back and you're like, man, like, does anybody get held accountable for anything? And then you ask yourself, well, what happens when you don't hold people accountable for anything? Because there have been arguments that Donald Trump needs to be granted a pardon. And, I mean, literally, I think it was yesterday, James Comey, of all people, decided that yesterday was a good day to say that Trump shouldn't be prosecuted. I mean, unbelievable timing there. I mean, really.
What? How did I miss this?
Yeah, James. Yeah, yes.
Comey is a great American example of, like, literally anything he says should be like, WTF, man. Why are you even, like, get out of here? You did your thing,
yes,
and now we'll never listen to you again. But instead, in America, you're like, no, tell me more. It's like inviting the losing senators on to television to be like, now tell Democrats how they can win, senator from the Midwest who lost.
Exactly.
And they're like,
it's just incredible.
Definitely don't give people health care. You know,
I mean, like,
it's incredible. And so then the you know, all, and let's unpack the argument that is made about this. Donald Trump needs to be given a pardon, supposedly, or not prosecuted, because we have to look forward, not backwards. That's the brand.
Oh,
forward,
hell no.
not backward.
Absolutely not.
But and look, I think what some of these folks are trying to say is we should be focused less on revenge and more on just fixing the country. But revenge is not the way you're supposed to look at the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system, when it operates properly, is one, for rehabilitation. Now, I'm not talking about, like, rehabilitating Donald Trump, but two, it is also supposed to be a deterrent. And the only way you deter, or the best way you can deter real crime, certainly white collar crime, like the kind we're talking about, is to say there is a consequence. There are harsh consequences for violating the law. And we wrote up at the Daily Poster a story, I think it was 2 days ago, about the culture of impunity. And there was a study, actually, by, I think it was Gonzaga researchers, that looked at white collar criminal enforcement. And the basic takeaway is that because white collar crime laws, less intense kind of way, and because they come with, they ended up getting pled down to much lower sentences than violent crime, that there is much more recidivism among white collar criminals.
Well,
what do you know? You don't have a good deterrent. Guess what? You're saying to people, go ahead and do this again. And now zoom back into this insurrection question. If you say Donald Trump, just as a principle, is not going to get prosecuted and should be pardoned, and all the people who helped him in all of his crimes should be given a get out of jail free card, and you say to the insurrectionists, and the Republicans who helped that, you're not going to face any consequences, then what you're saying is not just we're not going to get revenge on you, because again, that's not what it's supposed to be about. We're saying go ahead and do it again, because you've just learned that there is no consequences. That is the definition of moral hazard. You're creating a moral hazard that jeopardizes your own country's democracy.
Well, and there's a lot, like, oh, I have so much to say. Do you guys want to go for 8 hours today? Okay, look, there are a couple things, and one of them is that the craving for justice is a human thing. It is very much baked into how we function, both as groups and as individuals. So I think you're absolutely correct, David. To talk about it as revenge is to be so politically ignorant and totally divorced from how polities have to behave if there is to be, and I can't believe I'm saying this, any legitimate law and order. If you want to create a society where people have any sense of good faith in their legislators and governments, then there needs to be consequences for behavior that is so divorced, not just from morality, but from basic political civilized behavior. I mean, what we've seen in the Trump administration isn't just immoral as progressives or people who value the human species or whatever. It's also just kind of deranged and mad. And when that kind of behavior is allowed to exist and exist in the highest office we have in a democratic society, how is there supposed to be any kind of peace or any kind of order in basic political states? And the second thing about Wall Street specifically, so there's this book Liquidated, and this woman, Karen Ho, did a case study, an anthropological case study about how Wall Street works at a cultural level, not at like an economic one. And it was fascinating because she talks about what you guys are talking about, how not only is corruption not disincentivized, it's incentivized. People are taught, finance bros of all genders are taught that doing sneaky shit is actually smart and sophisticated and financially whatever. So you have this group of people who view themselves as ballers, like watch Wolf of Wall Street. You don't need to have an economics degree to understand these people are deranged. And they're not only given a space on Capitol Hill, they're given like an elite space in our political and economic hierarchy. That's nuts.
It's
Let me put in one.
It's totally nuts. I mean, it's totally
Let me put in
nuts.
one more thing, David, on top of that, because I think we've got you for just a little bit more.
Oh, sorry. Did I talk too long? My bad.
No.
Why would you ever apologize for that? I'm on the show too. If there's a long talker, I just wanted to use Michael Lewis's Liar's Poker to just. There's a story in there. It opens up with a vignette, which Jocelyn is exactly what you're talking about, where he is on the desk trading bonds, debt, and they give him this debt that is IBM at the time. This is corporate debt, and he ends up selling it, and it's a big money deal, like $600,000 or something. And he does it, and he's proud. And then they announce it over these speakers, and then everyone starts coming to his desk. And they're like, I can't believe you sold that junk. That is the most worthless debt that has ever been. It's a joke that we give it to people. And he realizes at that moment that what he's just done is actually commit fraud, that he sold a bank a bill of goods, and then he's congratulated for it. And the community of people are actually incentivizing him. And then he says, and then he gets his 6-figure paycheck as a 20-something-year-old. And you create that culture, and you've just created a pressure cooker that selects for sociopathy and psychopaths. Like, that's it. The people who are going to go up and up and up are those who have no moral compass at all. And actually, that I think we're like at the tail end of that. It started in the 80s. It really hit the gas after the collapse, right? Like, we didn't deal with the collapse. We actually threw more money at them. So they got richer after they broke the world's economy. It's the same thing. All the bros come around you and slap you on the back for committing the biggest fraud ever. It's a fraud so big that you're rewarded for it, because if you were punished for it, we'd have to change the entire system.
That's right. No, that's really a very good point about the system itself. At this point, the system itself is built on impunity. It's built on corruption. And so the people who run the system have a vested interest in preserving it, because the way they got their power, their wealth, their status is by mastering that system. So systemic change, that's why systemic change is so difficult. It's because the people in the system itself have a personal interest in preserving it because it's theirs, right? So changing the system, think about, as an example, you want to change the campaign finance system even a little bit. Okay, we want to make congressional races publicly funded. Sounds like a great idea. Good for democracy. One of the problems that you run into is that everybody who's voting on that proposal is a master of the current system. And so changing the system that they have mastered is like the average member of Congress would be like, well, it might be a good idea, but I'm the master of this current system. And if I change it to a new system, like, maybe I won't be the master of it. Maybe that'll help people, that'll help other challengers or help, complicate my life. So systemic change is hard because the system itself wants to preserve itself. And I think, as Alex, you suggested, we're at the tail end of so many of these pathologies. Hopefully it's the tail end, but maybe it's not, the end is the wrong word. We are now living in almost a purified version of all of these pathologies, uninterrupted, unimpeded. And now we see a kind of very pure expression of it, a dangerously pure expression of it, when you literally have created a culture of impunity that is so intense that people feel like they can storm the literal U.S. Capitol in an armed insurrection without fear of consequences. And so, when I hear that Joe Biden, as an example, is saying he wants to come in and he wants to, I want to move forward, not backwards. I don't want to look, we need to move on and heal the country. Like, no, like, you cannot heal the country unless you start putting in place accountability. If you try to turn the page on this, it is only going to get worse. And I fear that they don't understand that and maybe and I don't want to say that they're stupid or they're unable to understand it. It could just be short-term thinking, like, hey, I want to get through the next year or the next 6 months or the next, I just want to get through one presidential term, and then but like the short-term thinking of it is a problem, and it's a product of an election system. Obviously, you got to run every 4 years, or House members run every 2 years. They're thinking about stuff like right here, but fascism is clearly right at the horizon. If you don't start taking it seriously and put in accountability for an insurrection against the United States government, what comes next?
Well,
and that's a terrifying question.
It's, David, it's as you're talking, I'm struck by the Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. It's nice for personal relationships. I mean, look, as if you're going to be couples counseling or whatever, that's great. But if you're talking about politics, which we are, people respect displays of strength. And if what you're telling them is democracy is weak and corrupt, and that it doesn't work, and that involves handing billions and billions over to Wall Street in the middle of a fucking pandemic, then people are going to go with the guy who seems stronger. And that might not be consciously what people are thinking, but that is how it goes. I mean, you saw the pictures of these lunatics yesterday. They looked like they were having a great time.
Yeah.
They were glorying in this. And the way to respond to that is, one, to hold them accountable in a very severe way, but also to be the type of political actors that people have faith in and that appear strong and moral coherent, and not, like you're saying, to just be so focused on the details of the current system that you get lost in it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Have we taken you over? I'm not great with time.
Ted,
that's okay.
Ted,
I'm about at my limit. I've got to go help the kids with remote learning.
Nice.
Yes, the failures of the Trump administration making us all full-time workers and teachers. All teachers should be paid $1 million. That's what I've learned during this pandemic. They are amazing. Just to put a really fine point on it, what we're talking about, I want specifically, and again, I don't think we need to get it all. I actually think the culture of impunity is quite brittle because powerful people really hate being held accountable, right? Really hate it. Just the littlest bit of it, and they're like, so Ted Cruz needs to be held accountable in a very serious way by the new Democratic majority in the Senate. Josh Hawley needs to be held, and there's a million ways that the majority leader can do that. But they need to be held accountable in the court that they care about, which is in front of their peers. They need to be held accountable there. On the other side of the hill, on the House side, there's many more of them over there. But Paul Gosar, Mo Brooks, Louis Gohmert. I mean, these guys need to be anathema. These concepts are very old. We understand this, right? Like the concept of revenge turning to justice is one of the key Greek tragedies, the key Greek writings, right? When society realized that revenge isn't what we're looking for, it's justice. And justice looks different. But justice means accountability for these people who would violently overthrow our democracy. So I wanted to just name names, and I'm wondering if sort of in closing here, David, if you have any specific people that you think, I can throw out Stephen Miller from the administration. I mean, this guy has done deeply immoral, and I would say crimes against humanity level things, with putting the children in cages and other policies that indiscriminately hurt civilians. These are people who need to be held to account, and I want to name their names. So I'm wondering if you think I'm off on the ringleaders here.
No, I mean, I think it is right to name names. I mean, it's a cliche, but I think obviously, I mean, Trump himself needs to be actually held accountable. I mean, he wasn't held accountable for almost explicit obstruction of justice vis-a-vis, Comey and that whole thing that unfolded a couple of years ago, and then trying to throw the election, trying to pressure the Georgia election officials. I mean, Lindsey Graham tried to pressure Georgia election officials, and that was considered like a one-day story, and then, goodbye. I think, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, they were held accountable at the polls. Those Georgia senators, they were thrown out of it. But that's not the kind of justice. That's not nearly enough. I mean, they were insider trading amid the pandemic. I think Richard Burr, the senator from North Carolina, was doing that. That's like a forgotten story. So, I mean, I could name, we could spend the whole another hour just listing people. But I think it's not, there's no mystery on who has not been held accountable for things that we used to define as, like, at minimum, transgressions. And in all honesty, they look like crimes, right? There's plenty of perpetrators that we know of. The question is whether there is going to be a will to hold them accountable, whether there will be a political awakening that you keep getting these kinds of white collar and political criminals because you don't hold them accountable. And the last thing I'll say on it is that part of what's going on here is that politicians who are in office don't like to think about holding other politicians accountable because they don't like to imagine themselves being held accountable. A president coming into office doesn't necessarily want to set the precedent that we will look back on the crimes of a past president, because they don't want a future president to look back and evaluate and scrutinize the crimes that they may commit. So breaking that cycle, I mean, that is the challenge of our lifetime right now.
Well, David, I think that's absolutely correct. And I recommend mandated therapy for all. That is my first executive action. So David, where can people find your work, and how can we support you or get involved or whatever?
You can find all the journalism that we're doing at dailyposter.com. It's pretty, you click there, you'll see exactly the kind of stuff we do. And we do accountability journalism. I mean, we don't hold people criminally accountable, but we report on crimes. As one of my friends said, you should almost call yourself a crime reporter at this point.
Nice. I love that.
David, thanks so much for joining us here on Solidarity Live. And everybody who's watching and listening, go check out David's journalism and his team at dailyposter.com. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Jocelyn, I don't know. I feel like the idea of we could talk about the Greek tragedy of from revenge to justice. There's so much that we
I
can talk about.
know. I have so much I want to say. Brad, what are you doing after this? You want to go till 2 o'clock? I feel like I feel like this is a very interesting point. And David, I mean, David's so right. You can't, all I keep thinking about this is until we have a situation where we are honest about the fact that this lack of accountability isn't an accident. It's like David was saying, it's people who don't want to hold themselves accountable because they don't want to be the person. I mean, maybe we just need to throw the whole Congress out
But
and start over.
there is around the world, there's definitely other points of view, and I'm not saying that they're like definitely better, but the French system, for example, and Japanese system, I believe, is in a similar way. This is more like norms than you are
Mm-hmm.
reading it out. But the systems actually, when the one party gets in power, literally the first thing they do is prosecute the last party who was in power. And it creates a different dynamic that people don't want to get out of power because they know that they are going to be held to account for what they did when they had power. This is sort of in a parliamentary system, it is a little bit easier, but you can see it in both presidential and parliamentary. I just mean that it's not impossible to reframe how politicians view this.
Look, all
And
I'm saying is that in the Henry VIII administration, none of his wives had a good time after they were falling out of favor. And do we bring that method back? No, not necessarily. I'm just saying that you're right. There are political precedents.
yeah, the uh, the idea of holding people accountable for all of the things that they've done is such a basic idea, right?
It's
Like,
so
hey,
basic.
rich and powerful people shouldn't get out of jail free cards because then they will do crime. Um, like maybe, and again, I feel like there's a lot of leeway because you're not going to be able to get everybody, but if you
Well,
get some of the top people, especially the people like it's the opposite of what happens if you go after the most powerful people who have done wrong. That sends the message because if you go after the foot soldiers, then the
yes.
message is just get more powerful, get so powerful that they won't come after you. Uh, so I think that's why I really like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. To me, are the ones who need to be held accountable. I think at an equal level as Trump for the armed insurrection that was launched on the U.S. Capitol yesterday, which included 4 people dying. One woman was shot by the Secret Service or Capitol Police after she smashed a window and tried to climb through that window, and she was shot dead. And 3 other people had heart attacks or other medical conditions. But all of that death is actually related to the armed insurrection. And
Well,
there
and
was a
it's
conspiracy to bring
yeah.
that about.
And it's interesting that you bring up the foot soldier thing because look, I know we're almost out of time, but I really do think it's important for people to understand how blatant it is who don't spend a ton of time on Capitol Hill like Alex and I do in non-pandemic times. The reason this is insane and the reason that we can't be going after foot soldiers is because for me, like when I'm down there, right, whether I'm live streaming or when I used to work on the Hill, like one wrong move and they
Yes.
are on top of you. And
No,
I don't even mean,
and they're felonies. They're
yeah,
felonies.
yeah.
Like I have done lots of protests, and it's literally one wrong move, and you're going to get slapped with federal felony charges. I mean, like, it's mind-boggling to me to see the images that we saw. You and I were there when the Capitol Police literally told us that if you had your hands up like this, it was a sign of protest and you would be arrested for having your hands up like this. And I saw a dude smile for the camera after having stolen the speaker's podium.
Oh yeah, that guy's everywhere. That guy's real popular right now. You know, it's so funny because I literally sent like 30 texts to a friend about this before we went live. So there's so many stories with me and the Capitol Police. So many. And Brad, by the way, he's on in the background. But but the one that I keep thinking about for some reason, a little anecdote. Kavanaugh, we were covering the protest. I think it must have been in front of Susan Collins' office. And it was either Will or Phil was trying to get a shot of me. So I'm like, you know, like with my little mic, like, hi, I'm Jocelyn at act.tv. Super harmless. I know that I can, like, I don't like to think of myself as a terribly intimidating person. And the cops were on top of us. Man, you can't be here. This is not. And I was like, yeah, like, why are you? I know that I'm allowed to be here. I know I'm allowed to be here. They didn't want us to have shots of the protesters. Why? Because they enjoy acting out their power, probably because, you know, life has not gone how they wanted it to. And so the people that they're going to like pick on are protesters and media. And like, I ended up getting into this straight up altercation with this member of the Capitol Police. Him and his friend were like getting really upset at me. And I was like, yeah, I'm allowed to be here. And as he walked away, he literally was like, because finally his coworkers were like, all right, dude, you've got to like calm down. Like, you're getting way too upset about this. He walked away. He's like, I better not run into that bitch here again. Like, me, what are you afraid of? I promise you I'm not armed. I promise you I'm only verbally aggressive on the internet. Meanwhile, these mayonnaise Americans are marching into Capitol Hill with assault rifles and the same type of, I was going to say a curse word, but I held back. The same type of people are taking selfies with them. Like, it's crazy. And I think
the part that I just want to just really zoom in on for anyone outside of DC to understand is that, like, with the story that you were telling, we were over in the Hart Senate office building. The most stories that these are the Senate office buildings on the Senate side of the Capitol. The Capitol has two sides, the Senate side and the House side, and then the office buildings are separate on each side of it. And then the Capitol, the dome itself, is in the middle, the rotunda. If you even touch the stairs on the sides of it, if you even touch the stairs, the Capitol Police will arrest you. The Capitol Police will slap zip cuffs, the same exact zip cuffs that we saw armed insurrectionists walking around with, armed in the Capitol, inside that building with the plastic zip ties. These cops will arrest you for touching the places that they just were ransacking it. There's a picture of a woman who'd ripped a part of Nancy Pelosi's nameplate off, and she was just holding it. And okay, so they were overwhelmed. This is a 2,000 person police force. 2,000 person police force with a $500 million budget. It's bigger than most metropolitan police forces. And all it's supposed to do is protect the seat of government. And somehow these Al-Qaeda members were able to just waltz right in. Right? I mean,
Al-Qaeda, I can't.
It's outrageous that this has been let to. So I am not saying that the dude with the horns with the no shirt on, who is just sitting there broken, committed all sorts of federal crimes, that he's not going to be prosecuted. That dude needs to be prosecuted. The podium guy, prosecuted, because those people, what they did, and I
obviously agree with that. Sorry, I don't know if that was clear.
I think we agree on this, but for them, if they're listening to our show, which I don't think they do, get yourself a lawyer now, because you're facing like 25 to 200 in federal prison for what happened there, because people died. It was trespassing on the U.S. Capitol. property destruction. I mean, like the list goes on and on. You're not even allowed to take pictures in House and Senate offices because there's people's personal correspondence in there. It's also just a way that they limit the people's ability to see. A dude went into Nancy Pelosi's office and stole one of her letters to another member. Like, this is what happened. It's unbelievable. Egged on by the President of the United States of America.
And I really want to just underscore again what you said. They weren't overwhelmed. It's like, I know that our lives, me and you, Alex, are unique because we live in DC and we've been here for years and we spend an unhealthy amount of time on Capitol Hill. So it's like very obvious to us that they were not, it is not possible for the amount of policing they have there to be overwhelmed by the crowd we saw yesterday.
Yeah, I have personally organized things that are double the size of it. It was not a big protest numerically.
No. And in fact, that's a really interesting point. Like, you guys go back and look at some of our work of us covering ICE protests, of us covering Kavanaugh protests, of us covering climate protests, where, trust me, the police were more than capable of corralling hundreds and hundreds of people who just like swarmed into the Capitol. But like that they can control. And yet, how many people were even there yesterday?
A couple thousand, a few thousand. But when I was arrested in the Kavanaugh protest, the protest against Kavanaugh, I think there were 120 arrests on that one day.
I feel like Kavanaugh numbers were bigger though.
What? I can look. Maybe it's just my section of it. The people that I was.
Not of arrest. I mean, the Kavanaugh bigger numbers were bigger than.
I think the Kavanaugh
by a lot.
But I've been in both left and right wing protests that were way bigger. The original Tea Party protests in 2010, they were quintuple the size. And again, when you're think like the riot police, machine gun police. That's what Capitol Hill has. But they decided to put on their friendly face, which they didn't for us peaceful protesters who just had the audacity of demanding health care. Militarized up for that. That was rubberized machine gun stuff and zip ties as far as the eye could see. It was so obvious to me that they were complicit that I didn't even have to watch the video of them opening the barricades for the insurrectionists, which is there.
They
open the barricades and let them in. But I knew it right away because you cannot get to where they got to without complicity by at least some of the Capitol Hill police. So in the moment of accountability that we're pushing for, the heads of the Capitol Police, I want all of their emails, oversight, the committee on oversight. I want every correspondence that those people had and officers had with any of these members who were leading the inside insurrection against. So, Gosar and Gohmert and Cruz, because I can almost guarantee you that you got some member of Congress writing the Cap Police and being like, hey, just spice it up a little bit. Let them get in a little bit closer so that we can own the libs or whatever it was. But I am like, that needs to be investigated.
Well, you're absolutely right, Alex. And I love that you bring that up because there is no other explanation. Like, and again, I sound like I'm hill-splaining, but it is so important for people to get how unprecedented this is. Because I think, unfortunately, some of the beautiful photojournalism that came out of yesterday looks sort of like, oh, well, they couldn't help it. The smoke and the fire and the man with the horns. It's like, no, this is not normal. We march with like huge numbers into the hill all the time. And by the way, I don't want that anecdote of me getting sassy with a hill cop to paint the wrong picture. I am a nice person. I'm a polite person. I'm a civilized person. And yet they yell at me all the time anyways, because these are armed people with power issues who love enforcing their authority. Think about that. These are people, you don't become a cop because you secretly wanted to study interpretive dancing. You become a cop because you love authority. And if you love authority and you're not enacting it when you are paid and legally obligated to do so, what does that say about which side of history you are on? And I want to see all those people in jail, all of them, because it's like we were just discussing with David. It is really not about the individuals themselves, and it sure as hell is not about revenge. It is about law and order in a very sincere way. If people in this country cannot feel like their most important government buildings are immune from this kind of dipshit attack, then what kind of faith are any of us supposed to have in our political entities? It's just ridiculous.
And if members of Congress feel that they're under physical threat by armed insurrectionists, if they don't follow the authoritarian line, we know where that leads, and it's fascism. So the only way that we're going to win this, Jocelyn knows what I'm going to say.
Wait, hold on. I don't know. I'm waiting. Tell me.
It's through solidarity. And I think we opened the show talking about pragmatic solidarity, that we need to work to make people's lives materially better. We need to hold Democrats accountable as well. They promised $2,000 checks. Day one, I want $2,000 checks. Literally print them on pieces of paper that are shaped like Joe Biden in aviator glasses given finger guns. $2,000, right? Whatever it is that you want to do it. But get that money into people's hands and fight for health care, fight for Social Security. We need to make people's lives better. But also, solidarity means holding people accountable.
Yes.
We need to clean house on day one. At Social Security, we need to fire the commissioner, the deputy commissioner on day one. They are enacting policies that lead directly to harm and death for people with disabilities. And they're rushing this through. Andrew Saul, David Black, we need them out on day one. And that also is solidarity, because it's solidarity to understand systems of violence and how we need to dismantle these systems of violence. Otherwise, the system just grows and continues its violence on us. So it's great having us back in our first show in 2021, Jocelyn. If you want to have the final words to our wonderful viewers and listeners, but it's going to be a wild ride. It's going to be different than the last 4 years, but I think it's going to be more important than ever that we understand only by standing in solidarity with each other can we build a better world.
Well, that is very true. And I do always love to have the last word. But look, I'm sorry, guys. It's been a week. And I really just solidarity with each other, but also to just really underscore for people that if we are not holding those accountable for their crimes against humanity, whether they are politicians or insane men with tiki torches and bizarre headgear, if we are not holding those people accountable, is to commit violence against people they hurt. And that is just like, if that is our takeaway from this is what a lack of accountability looks like. This is what us peace and love and going high when they go low. No, when they go low, we beat them, period. When they go low, we take away their power. And that is what we are going to do in 2021 and forever, I like to think. But let's just start with this year. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. It can really only go up from Wednesday. Have a great one.
Don't say that.
Never mind. I jinxed it. Let it go.